you'll be able to do that. Also, to be absolutely clear, this session's completely confidential. Anyone who is here, no one else knows who you are. It's completely confidential, so any questions you may ask via the Q&A function will only be visible to myself and Ashley Manning, who is my colleague from Mercer Marsh Benefits also. So feel free to ask questions as we go through. There will be time at the end to ask questions also. Today's session is called Being Better with Money, and that's really what this is all about. Your employer is really keen that, especially at this difficult time, it does everything it can to make sure that you have all the tools available to you to deal with your financial situation as you may find it. And they do that with us alongside Hospitality Action, your employee assistance program provider. And Hospitality Action are a first-class operation who will help you with any crisis that you might feel you're concerned with right now. I'll mention an example of how they have helped others towards the end of the session. But remember, Hospitality Action are there in association with your employer and with ourselves here at Mercer Marsh Benefits. So with no further ado, let's carry on with the session. Again, I'm Chris McNamara. I work for Mercer Marsh Benefits. We are we're corporate financial advisors. However, today is not about offering financial advice. Today is about talking about our financial behaviours, how we can maybe deal with them slightly differently in order to make both the most of the money we have and to make the most of the spending that we do as well, to try and make sure that money goes as far as possible. I can't recommend what you should or should not do. There might be some slight exceptions to that rule, but today's session is to be able to put you in a more powerful position so that you can leave today after the first and the second session, which will start at 2:30, to give you more information about how to deal with your finances. The first session is about behaviours, so it's around how we can think about our finances differently. The second session gives you some absolute hands-on tips, things that you can action right now, and there are one or two that will immediately start saving you money if you decided you wanted to use that information. So we've got a brief agenda of things we're going to talk about in this first session, which should last less than an hour, probably 45 minutes to an hour, depends on questions that we have. And we're going to start by talking about your attitude to money. And when we're talking about your attitude to money, you need to be realistic. You need to be honest with yourself and maybe discuss it with anyone else in your household that makes financial decisions. How does your attitude to money have an effect on how much you have left at the end of the month and how your savings are acting? We'll look at budgeting. And for many of us, we might think that's a really basic statement, but we will look at budgeting. So how much is coming out and how much is going in? How much is coming in and how much is going out? And what action we can take to make the most of both of those. We'll look at tax very briefly. We'll look at your tax code. This is an area where we need to think really closely. Are we getting as much out of the money that's coming into our household as we possibly could? We'll have a brief look at protection and prioritising debt. And whilst this session is largely about saving money, there are some areas where if we are spending on some protections, and I'll cover them a bit later, we should probably try and keep that up if we possibly can. And I'll explain why a little later during the session. Now, at any time, by all means, use the Q&A function. I don't guarantee that I will see a question popping up. However, my colleague Ashley will, and we'll either answer them as we go, if we see them, or at the end of the session. So please feel free. And remember, your questions are completely confidential. No one else can see what you're asking. No one can see who you are. So feel free. And that's the whole premise of this session today. So let's talk about your attitude to money. To be financially well, and we hear about physical well-being and we talk about mental well-being a lot. I think what is inextricably linked to both of those is having financial well-being. And again, your employer is really keen that you have as much support as possible with all of your financial well-being and your physical and emotional well-being needs too. And again, a reminder, Hospitality Action will be able to help with that if you need to speak to someone individually about anything that we talk about today. There are typically 4 pillars to financial well-being. The 3 pillars on the right-hand side we'll leave largely for today because there's something that's more important than any of them, especially at this time. And that's having control over your day-to-day spending. Making sure that by the end of the month, we have a little bit of money left over. And if that's not the case, how can we maybe change things to make that happen? By making sure that we pay our gas and electric bills on time to make sure there is food on the table. That's what day-to-day spending is all about. And today's session will help you take more control of that aspect of your financial well-being. The other areas, such as making financial choices, keeping on track, and being able to absorb a financial shock, clearly are important. But right now, let's stick to the matter in hand, and that is having control over our day-to-day spending. So think about when you consider spending money and your psychology of spending money. Do you, or are you one of the individuals, and I know I have found myself guilty of this, think, well, credit cards aren't real money. I'm just passing across my card and therefore I'll pay it up eventually. And certainly with having contactless payment more recently, that becomes even more a fact that we think less and less about the money we are spending because it just seems so painless to do so. Clearly, it's difficult to spend money in any other way these days. However, a great way of maybe taking more control over that and making money feel more real is to try, if at all possible, to pay with cash. Paying with cash really feels like you are spending your own money, as opposed to putting money on a credit card and making that credit card bill bigger and bigger every month. Do we sometimes spend money because we're feeling a bit low? Do we feel a bit negative? So a bit of, as they call it, retail therapy sometimes helps. Well, if we're in a situation where we are maybe spiraling debt is getting larger, then trying really hard to overcome that feeling might be an appropriate thing to do. So don't buy to feel better. Maybe try and do something that will distract us from that urge to spend money on potentially things that we really don't need. You might have heard of Maslow. Maslow was a psychologist who created the hierarchy of human needs. And we can convert that hierarchy of human needs into financial needs also. There are, as we go towards the top of the pyramid, stuff that we probably don't actually need as much as the detail at the bottom. And certainly survival money, being able to pay for our rent, our mortgage, our food, and heat and light in our homes are by far the most appropriate. And that's what today's sessions are really all about, to allow you to, if you haven't already gained control, regain control of those areas of your spending. So let's talk about budgeting. And for many of you, I appreciate this might seem really basic, but I think it's important to be reminded of some of the most basic facts sometimes. When we're budgeting, what we're trying to establish is, have we got enough money to get through the month? And if we are, that's great news. However, many of us just don't really know how to do it as effectively as possible. So firstly, let's look at our income. And I don't just mean the income you get from work. Are you maybe in receipt of income from any state benefits? Maybe some of you are older and might have access to pension income. Maybe if you've got money in the bank or building society, you might even have a little bit of interest from savings that you have. Hopefully, the amount of income you have is larger than the amount of money that goes out. And the money that goes out, we have a lot of control over how much that would be. So for example, our car and transportation costs, our food costs, and our mortgage or rent payments. And there'll be other regular payments that we make that aren't listed here. But in order to be in a good financial position, as far as budgeting is concerned, we need to try and make sure that income is bigger than our expenditure. So we need to try and aim to spend a little bit less each month. And the session later today will explain a number of ways that you can implement to immediately start saving money and aim to spend a little bit less every month. I mentioned previously that one of the purposes of this session is to help you gain control. If you feel you have lost control, please remember Hospitality Action are available there to give you some help and guidance. Once you have gained control, you'll really want to keep it, and you'll find it much easier to keep control once you have regained it.
Sorry, Chris, we've just had one request as to can we see you? Have you got your camera set up?
You can see me if you really want to see me. I'm not sure exactly why you would want to see me, but I'm going to start my video now. And yeah, so there you can
Great,
see me.
thank you.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm not going to keep the video on all the time because it's really distracting for me because I keep seeing me and that's not a pretty sight. So I'm going to, hopefully everyone's seen me now. Hi, good to see you all. I'm going to turn video back off right now. Okay, thanks for that. So we talked about budgeting. Hopefully everyone's got a piece of paper in front of them right now. And if you haven't, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to run and grab a piece of paper. You don't have to do this, but I think it's a useful exercise. So if you can, grab yourself a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. Okay, so hopefully we're all back now and able to write some stuff down. To carry out a budgeting exercise is far more straightforward than you would imagine. We're going to provide you with a workbook after this session, which will include the budget planner that you can see on the screen right now. But as a first port of call, let's write down a couple of the things that we currently pay for, things that you pretty much think you regularly pay for on a regular monthly basis. And if we can do that, maybe for the first 3 or 4 of those points. Okay, so hopefully we've all written down 3 or 4 points. Beside each of them, either put a tick or a cross. A tick meaning, you know what, I just cannot possibly do without that. Or the others being a cross saying, well, I could live without it if I really, really had to. And then for the items that are ticked, do you think you could cut back? Do you think you could reduce those costs? Is there any way you think of that maybe you could reduce the amount of outgoing that you have? And maybe following the second session, you'll have more ideas about how you could reduce some of those outgoings by having the same thing coming into your household, but you're getting better value for money. Another great way of taking control of our finances is to know when costs are going to happen. Every year, regular things happen. Christmas happens, birthdays happen, our car insurance, tax and MOT happen. And they happen every single year. So we know that they're going to happen and we probably have a good idea of when they're going to happen too. So setting up a financial calendar, if you've not done so already, can be a great way of budgeting for your future. By setting aside a little bit of money every month from your regular income to build up enough to pay for these particular items that are going to come up during your financial year. Talk about car finances, for example. We know that your car will need an MOT. It will need insurance. It may need a service. And that's probably going to happen at the same time every year. And we have a rough idea of how much that is going to cost. So if we're able to divide that cost by 12, if we're paid on a monthly basis, and direct that money into your bank account. And we'll talk about your bank account in a minute or two. There are other times that are more discretionary about when we spend money, such as birthdays, such as Christmas. Now, these definitely do happen. However, it's important for us now at this difficult time to maybe think about how we can take more control over that. How many times have we got to Christmas and received gifts from people that we felt compelled to buy a gift for? Often, and it sounds a bit rude, but often those gifts are not exactly what we would like to have received. And we've probably bought the other person a gift when they probably didn't really want that item either. A new bit of communication has been happening just over the last couple of years based on what Martin Lewis, who's a well-known financial expert on TV, has been discussing. And that is to have a grown-up and adult conversation with those who we're closest to say, look, times are hard, finances are tight. For this year only, maybe we'll review this again. Can we not buy each other Christmas gifts? Now, those small changes in behavior, marginal gains, as they're sometimes called, could build up to quite a significant saving. If, for example, like you see in the bottom right-hand corner, your Christmas expenditure was £500, if you can reduce it to 250 or even lower, you've got the rest to pay for the more important stuff that you'll deal with during the rest of your financial year. I understand that this may be a difficult conversation to have with some members of your family and some of your loved ones. However, you might discover that by having that conversation, you know what? They want to do exactly the same. So once we've established that financial calendar and we know when the expensive times are going to be, we might want to segregate that saving into different financial pots within our bank account. Now, many bank accounts these days will allow you to set up mini pots within them. So there may be some birthdays that even after the difficult conversation we just discussed, and likewise Christmas, there may be some gifts that we feel we're compelled to buy. So therefore, we want to segregate some money. We need to be disciplined here. We need to make sure that if we put money into our birthdays pot, it is only there for birthdays. It is not there for any other reason. If your bank account does not allow you to set up these mini pots within it, there are lots of other bank accounts that will allow you to do so. It doesn't need to be your main bank account. Your main bank account is responsible for making sure your bills are paid. So your gas, electric, rent, phone bill, and so on. The other parts, which are very discretionary, it's up to you to determine if you want to set them up within your own bank account and segregate them, or set up another bank account elsewhere. I mentioned earlier Martin Lewis. This is his website, moneysavingexpert.com. Every Wednesday morning, Martin sends an email out to all of his members, giving all of the best financial deals around. Now, it doesn't need to be just the unexciting financial deals, things like credit cards and gas and electric bills. It can also be more fun stuff like reducing the cost of your Sky subscription, if you have that, or even, as my wife has discovered, finding fantastic deals to get cheap Prosecco. Martin Lewis's Money Saving Expert website is free to use. And if you're ultimately going to search for better deals for the rest of your monthly outgoings, this is a great place to start. We're not affiliated with Martin in any way. There are other comparison websites out there, but this one seems to be the one that has most traction, and most people will find good deals from it. So I mentioned we'd look at tax and your pay slip. Tax is important because we all have to pay it. Sadly, we don't start paying any tax until our income rises above £12,500 a year. Once we get to that point of earning income of above £12,500 a year, we start to pay tax at a rate of 20%. So 20% of everything we earn above £12,500 up to £50,000, we pay at a rate of 20%. Now, that £12,500 is important, especially when we talk about tax code, which we'll do on the next slide. Be aware as well that you pay national insurance. National insurance entitles you to a number of state benefits, and it will also entitle you to a state pension at some point in the future. We start paying national insurance once our income rises above £9,500. And we pay that at a rate of 12% up until our income reaches £50,000. So it is possible that if your income is between £9,500 and £12,500, you won't pay any tax, but you'll still pay some national insurance at a rate of 12%. What we see here is a copy of a typical pay slip. And of course, one of the really important numbers is the one on the bottom right, how much you're actually taking home. Could you potentially be taking home more than the number you regularly see at the bottom right? Well, one of the factors that really impacts on that is the number that's in the bottom left of your payslip. That is your tax code. Now, a standard tax code is 1250L, and that's what you hopefully will see on your payslip, or a number even bigger than that, but certainly not lower than 1250L. That corresponds with the amount of money we can receive without paying any tax. That's that £12,500 that I mentioned on the previous slide. There are ways of making that number bigger, especially for married people or people who are in civil partnerships, and I'll talk about that during the next session. But in order to make sure we're paying the right amount of tax and that not too much is being deducted, check your tax code. Is it 1250L? If it's not, find out why. A way of doing that is to contact the tax office, who will talk you through your particular tax code. You'll also see on the right-hand side, there are other deductions, such as pension. And I'll talk to you about your pension contribution during the next session. But before I get to that point, just to be clear, you were automatically enrolled into a pension scheme at some point when you became an employee at Brasserie Bar Company. You had the option at that time to withdraw from the pension, to opt out if you wished to do so. Neither your employer nor I can suggest that you should opt out, but you still have that option. So an easy way of increasing your take-home income would be to pause your pension contribution now and restart it at a later date when it becomes more affordable. For most of us, I think a pension has become less affordable over the past few months, and maybe introducing more cash into your household by pausing your pension contribution might be appropriate. We'll look at the actual numbers during the next session. So whilst today is really about trying to decrease our outgoings and make sure we get the most from our income, there are outgoings that we probably shouldn't mess with. If, for example, you have a family, if you have a spouse who's dependent upon you to provide for them, and you have life cover, life assurance that pays out when you die, if finances are tight, there are some things that we think maybe we should pause. Well, life cover is probably one of the things that we absolutely should not pause. Likewise, if we have income protection or critical illness cover or private medical, but let's focus on life assurance right now. If we have life assurance, that's there to provide a lump sum of capital in the event that the worst were to happen to you. Those who are left behind may depend on it. If you pause that life cover premium, the life cover is likely to stop straight away. And if the worst were to happen, then your dependents would receive nothing from that policy. Also, if you try to reapply for it later, certainly you'll be older. Life cover becomes more expensive when you're older. And indeed, if your health has suffered, it may not be possible for you to get that life cover at all. So if you have life cover, if you're paying for it right now, without making financial recommendations, it may be appropriate for you, if at all possible, to maintain that life cover premium. We talked earlier about emergency fund being something we'll look at maybe in the future. It's important to think about it for the future, but maybe not right now. We need to deal with our day-to-day spending first. We know that 7 in 10 households will have experienced at least one unplanned expense in the last 12 months. So that could be something like the microwave breaking down, the washing machine breaking down. If you own your own property, the boiler packing up or the car breaking down. One of my colleagues discovered that by looking at his bank account regularly, he was making some repetitive purchases, and the repetitive purchases were in coffee shops. Discovered he was spending at least £3 a day, often much more. And by saving just £3 a day by having one less coffee, he could save himself an extra £1,095 a year. Now, for people who are thinking about saving in the future or reducing their outgoings, I think that's an easy way of just considering, could I spend a little bit more on stuff that's repetitive right now that maybe I shouldn't be spending on regularly? I can point at myself in this regard. We look at our bank statement in my household. My wife looks at it and says, Chris, why do I see so many transactions for the Tawny Owl? Well, clearly not right now. The Tawny Owl is my local pub. Of course, we should still be allowed to do the things we enjoy. But if we see that they are repetitive and we see that there's a way of us changing them and reducing the cost, then maybe this is the time to start looking at that. If you're going to set up an emergency fund for if things were to go wrong, about 3 months of essential spending would be a useful goal to try and achieve. But before we do that, maybe trying to pay off any expensive debts first might be the most appropriate thing to do. And when we talk about being smarter with debt, there are 2 ways of approaching this. There's the snowball approach and there's the avalanche approach. Let's deal with the avalanche approach, which is the most fruitful, the most financially beneficial for you. The avalanche approach suggests that if you have debt, and let's call it credit card debt because that tends to be the most expensive, with interest rates anything between 15 and 30% on some credit cards, then often the size of that debt might not be getting much smaller because the cost is so high. If we're able to focus really hard on the most expensive debts, it means that in a shorter period of time, we'll get back to the point where the outgoing, the amount we're spending on that credit card, will reduce to the point where it completely disappears. And that happens much more quickly if we try and do the most expensive debt first. So look at your credit cards, if you have any. Look at any other debts that you might have. Do you have any that are costing a lot of interest? And if they are, try and focus on them first. Alternatively, that might be too much of a high hurdle to get across. Therefore, the snowball approach can also be useful. Look at smaller amounts of debt that you might have. By clearing the smaller amounts of debt, maybe a small overdraft or a small credit card balance that we have outstanding, that'll give us the psychological impetus or momentum to then think, well, if I've achieved that, I can achieve the avalanche approach with the bigger, more expensive debts in the future also. And certainly the snowball approach in any case will reduce your monthly outgoings because you won't be paying for that debt anymore. Let's look at borrowing money. Borrowing money on the first hand, if you look at the far right-hand side of the screen, is not always a bad thing. I'll cover why that might be in a moment or two. But let's start talking about credit cards. If we have a credit card, if at all possible, try and pay back what you owe on a monthly basis. That's going to have a couple of positive outcomes. Firstly, you won't pay as much interest. You won't pay any interest if you pay off all the balance by the end of the month. And secondly, if you're looking to maybe purchase a property, you'll need a good credit rating. And by paying off your credit cards on a regular basis, you'll increase your credit score. I'll talk about credit score very shortly. Spending money on a credit card is safer than cash, not least because you don't have a wad of cash in your purse or pocket, but because you have some protection due to financial services compensation scheme. Next to credit cards might be overdrafts. If we're borrowing for a very short period of time, could be really useful. Remember that overdrafts, whilst right now are fairly inexpensive, there's a possibility they will rise in cost significantly, with as much as 40% interest being charged on overdrafts, maybe in the future. Remember, those charges could be high. So if we're involved in a small amount of money that's outstanding with an overdraft, it could still cost us a lot. Remember also, overdrafts are not guaranteed. And just because we have access to an overdraft does not mean we should definitely use it. When we're borrowing money, there's a couple of golden rules. Largely, borrow money for emergencies or as a last resort. Maybe borrow money if we have a bill that is much higher than expected. Think about the financial behaviors we've exhibited earlier. Are we the kind of individual who thinks that credit cards aren't really money? If that is you, then maybe we need to think about getting our spending under control first and looking at every possible alternative before we borrow money, maybe on a credit card or via a personal loan. So I mentioned that it's not all bad news about borrowing. If you need to improve your credit rating, borrowing money can be a really useful thing to do. Borrowing money on a credit card and paying it back immediately shows you have financial integrity. It shows that you can resist temptation, and that's what lenders in the future will want to see. And certainly right now, if you're hoping to get more borrowing, by proving that you can deal with it effectively, you're more likely to get access to it. Maybe the credit card that you're using has an incentive scheme. Maybe you get bonus points, maybe you get air miles, and that could be really useful for you. So that's a great reason to use that credit card regularly. And maybe you also get some protection. Maybe you get travel insurance and so on. And finally, if you absolutely have to purchase something and it's a big purchase, then borrowing money might be the only way to do it if you want to do it in a reasonable period of time. But think that through. So your credit score is really important. Many of you on the call, I'm sure, will be, if you're not already doing it, will be thinking about getting on the housing ladder once COVID-19 has gone. Your income will rise and you'll be able to then consider purchasing a property. In order to do that effectively, or even get the best credit cards available, your credit score needs to be up to scratch. The higher your credit score, the better. Having a high credit score shows to the person who's going to lend you money that you're more likely to pay it back. So the bigger the score, the better. A couple of things we can do in order to improve that credit score. And the first thing is getting yourself on that electoral register. If you're not on the electoral roll, your employer or your debt provider will not be able to tell that you are who you say you are. Also, if you've been a person who's been very transient, that is moved from property to property, the lender may be suspicious that you've done that for not good reasons. So if at all possible, try and stay at the same address for sustained periods of time. Maybe you're financially linked to someone else, either by default or someone who you were actually in a relationship with. And we can often see that people have a bad credit score because someone else they were living with, as a partner or not, didn't deal with their finances quite as well as they could have done. Having a credit check done will show you a credit score and show you a list of all credit dealings that you've had over the past period of time, up to 6 years or so. Make sure you repay everything on time. When you get a bill, pay it within the allotted period of time. If you have a credit card, make sure that you pay at least the minimum amount outstanding by the date on the statement. If you've got a mobile phone contract, make sure you pay that on time. It's a credit agreement if you've purchased a phone using your mobile phone contract. Think about the amount of money you could go out and spend on credit cards. If you've been an individual who has been sensible with cards and moved balances around to 0% cards, maybe you have a number of cards that are still outstanding and open. So if each of those cards would give you, for example, £10,000 of a credit balance, and you've got 4 of them, if you really wanted to, you could go on a very big shopping spree and spend £40,000 in one go on credit cards. Clearly, that doesn't prove you would have financial integrity. So if you have cards outstanding, make sure they get cancelled and make sure the credit card company writes to you to confirm that that cancellation has happened. The final point I'll cover here is that if you have a credit card, try really hard not to draw any cash from the hole in the wall via your credit card. That immediately starts charging you interest, and it also says to anyone who is assessing you for a credit score that maybe your finances aren't really in control. Why didn't you draw money from your bank account rather than from using a credit card? It may show that you were desperate at the time. So try really hard not to do that, because you'll immediately start paying interest on the cash that you've withdrawn. So we are very nearly at the end of the session today, and it really is time for you to take some action. Remember, there will be a further session at 2:30 today, and that will give you some absolute tips that you can action straight away to either reduce your outgoings or increase your regular income. So time to take action. Things for you to think about. Review your day-to-day spending. Do sit down with someone else in your household if they make financial decisions with you. Review your regular spending, both of you, or everyone who is involved in that household. Think about the debt that you have outstanding. Could you move it to a less expensive environment? Are you increasing the size of the debt that you have outstanding? If you think that's a problem, if you think that's out of control, it might be appropriate to talk to someone. And I'll mention in a moment how Hospitality Action have really helped at least one individual with their debt situation. Whilst trying to reduce our outgoings and the cost of our outgoings, maybe you have some outgoings that you just can't reduce. If you have life cover, for example, it could be a really good idea to try and maintain that if you have it in place. It could be really difficult to get later, and it will certainly be more expensive because you will be older if you try and replace it. Do you need to make some decisions? Some difficult decisions, which on the face of it, might not be that difficult because the people you're making those decisions with, for example, I'm not going to buy you a birthday present this year. Finances are tight. I'm not going to buy you a Christmas present this year because finances are tight. They may well be thinking exactly the same thing. So who is able to help you? Well, certainly in the first instance, do reach out to wellbeing@brasserybarco.com. Helen and Wama are there and they are keen to hear from you. So if you do have any initial concerns or things you just want to discuss a little bit more, they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Finally, before I finish this section, I want to talk to you about hospitality action. Hospitality action will give you guidance on anything to do with financial dealings, with your physical or mental well-being, and maybe even issues that you have with alcohol, gambling, or drug abuse. Hospitality action are keen to talk about success stories, things that have gone well. And one thing that went particularly well was helping a colleague called Amy. Amy had spiraled into a problem with debt and had about £15,000 outstanding on credit cards. Her regular monthly outgoings were up to £1,200 just to service that debt. And that was absolutely for her not sustainable. Amy, following discussion with her employer, got in touch with Hospitality Action, who created a financial repayment plan for her. They then took on responsibility for communicating with all of the people who she owed money to. Instantly, the phone calls, the letters, the threats of knocks at the door from debt collectors immediately stopped. Her outgoing reduced from £1,200 per month to £300 per month, which is still a lot of money, but it means that it's now completely manageable and that within 4 years, her debt had completely gone. She was able to start afresh and move on with her life. In the meantime, the weight that was on her shoulders was completely lifted because she didn't have to worry about those nasty letters, nasty phone calls, or knocks at the door. So Hospitality Action really can help. They're there and ready to speak to you at any time. So please do reach out to Helen and Wana and get any contact details you might need for them. So I think I've probably said as much as I want to say today. Time for any questions that you might have. Ash, do we have any questions that maybe I can answer right now?
Yeah, we do.
Good.
So one question we've got is, do we have a cash flow template that we can use for better budgeting?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a cash flow template. Also, during the next session, I'll talk about the Money Advice Service. And the Money Advice Service is a government-backed organisation that has a fantastic cash flow planner that will help you. And also the workbook that we're going to send out to everyone, it will be in PDF format. We'll give you some detail about cash flow planning as well.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
This was not so much a question, but someone said that they get overdrafted every month since the pandemic. When their wages come, they're still in overdraft, so they're basically living on their overdraft.
Okay. If we are living on an overdraft, one of the main reasons for that, I assume, is that your outgoings are not reducing in size. Now, I'd suggest that the session we're going to talk about next will immediately have an impact on some of those outgoings so we can reduce them. And what that can potentially do is reduce the size of that overdraft. It will not get rid of it overnight, probably, but it will allow you to start to chip away at the overdraft. What that does is two things. Firstly, it reduces the cost. But secondly, it allows you to, again, feel that you're regaining control. And regaining control of your finances gives you the confidence to then move on and take on the bigger financial issues that you might be dealing with, as well as the overdraft. So if you're able to attend the next session, which starts at 2:30, we'll have some absolute facts and figures that we can talk to you about, things that you can deal with straight away to increase your income and reduce the cost of your outgoings. Hopefully that answers that question for you. Any other questions? It looks like not
That's
at
all
the
we've
moment.
got at the moment.
Is that everything we've got?
Yeah, if anybody does have any more questions, the Q&A function on your screen is open. Please remember to click anonymous if you are submitting something.
Okay, and finally, before I finish, I'd really just like to say thank you to Helen and Wana for arranging these sessions today. They funded them to make sure that, or the company rather has funded them to make sure that you have as much support as is possible during this really difficult time. And probably now is a good time. If you wanted to say anything, Helen and Wana, by all means, open your mic, but I totally understand if want to leave that maybe till the end of the next session if you want to say anything.
No, all good, Chris. Thanks. We'll see what happens at the end of the next session.
Okay,
Thank
lovely.
you very much.
Okay, right. Is that one more question we
Yeah,
have?
it is. You said not to withdraw any money on credit cards as this affects your credit score. But if you're in a different country and you need to withdraw as they won't accept your debit card, what's the best option?
Yep. Okay. You make a really good point there, and I should have raised it during the session. When you're abroad, there are specific credit cards that we can get these days that are best for withdrawing cash when we are abroad. I think Halifax is one of the providers of them, and they're designed specifically so that it will not affect your credit score, especially if you are drawing cash when you're abroad. The impact is that a lender will see you withdrawing cash on a credit card when ideally you should have been withdrawing cash on a debit card. If you're in the UK, if you're abroad, matters are entirely different, and maybe you will set up a different card, such as the Halifax one, which is designed to do exactly that. Any other questions?
That's all for now.
That all for now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've made fairly good time. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is close the session, say thank you very much for attending. I hope you found the session useful. Again, next session will start at 2:30, and it'll give you some of those facts and figures so that you can start making changes to your regular outgoings and taking more control of the income also. Thank you very much. Thank you.